All right, all. So this week's episode is about all of my favorite anime. So stay tuned. All right, so this week I'm back talking about my favorite anime. And it has been a while. I've had a lot of running around that I needed to do. But it's been a while since I've been able to watch some anime. My brother came here with my nephew, and I was able to put him on to Bleach, which he took to very quickly. But he's an 11-year-old boy, so he has his own thoughts about his favorite anime. So I just had to get Bleach in there. So let's start off with our countdown and talk about all things anime. So number one, I'm going to go with a tried and true favorite, FullMetal Alchemist, Brotherhood. Danny and her husband, when I was, getting back into anime, they decided that I hadn't seen Brotherhood and I need to see it. They don't subscribe to shonen in that way. And they don't subscribe to the big three, which I keep trying to get them to settle down and watch. But more on that later. But they had said, you should come over. We should all watch this together. It was on Hulu at the time, and we should sit down and watch it. FullMetal Alchemist. FullMetal Alchemist. And I had no idea what I was getting into, right? So, Danny's husband is not a person who likes to go into depth about what you're going to see. He just wants you to watch it and have a reaction. And this was, and it's like his favorite thing too, because I think I was at his house at their house for his birthday party a couple weeks ago, and one of his other friends had not seen Brotherhood either, and his eyes lit up. He was very much like, you should come over, we should do a watch party, so that's his thing. But to his point, the show was excellent. If you haven't read it, I wrote a blog post on it, a couple of my favorite scenes. Maybe I'll do a podcast specifically about my favorite scenes from that show. But great characters, great female characters, which I didn't realize until after I finished it. It makes sense because it was written by a woman. So they had substance, they had thoughts and feelings. There was an underlying love story. The world is on the brink of disaster, as you do in an anime. Government corruption, different things. So there was a lot going on, but I think it was jarring to me the first couple of episodes, because right off the bat, one of the things you learn is that you can't get something for nothing. So even when doing alchemy, there are rules, and trying to bring people back from the dead is not something that you could do, because it's they deal in the law of equivalent exchange, and nobody was watching the two boys, so sad, which is also usually the case in anime. I remember I was wearing like a t-shirt that had Roy Mustang on it. And it's very strange because when you talk to people, they ask you, well, which one did you watch? Did you watch, regular FMA, or did you watch Brotherhood? And, talking to Danny's husband, I was like, well, why are we not doing the 2003 version, and he was like, well, there's some differences from that show. It's not a bad show, but there's some differences between that anime adaptation and how she writes it in the manga. And he was like, so it's up to you. We can do one or the other. I prefer Brotherhood, and it's a more faithful adaptation. Well, that's all I need to know. You know what I mean? So we jump right into it. And like right away, it was like boys tried to bring mother back from the dead. Boy loses brother. Boy loses arm and leg trying to or his leg trying to get his brother back. And it was like intense early on. So he's trying to figure out how to get his brother's body back. He becomes the FullMetal Alchemist because he believes that, using the government and their resources, he'll be able to do research and different things to be sure to get his brother's body back, and all of that implies. So, and it's weird because I think something in my mind always stated that it's not something that they didn't know. Like, human transmutation was taboo, and I think that most people who were doing alchemy knew that. But you meet a couple of people in the story who tried it for various reasons and end up in different situations. So I was on the ride trying to figure out how they were going to get their bodies back or whatever. They go on the hunt trying to get a Philosopher's Stone. We're introduced to my favorite character, Colonel Mustang. And then you start to see how manipulative the government is, how they went into different parts of the country and took over things or took things from these people, murdered a bunch of people. And there's a lot of government corruption that is unearthed there. So maybe my next episode I'll do with Danny so we could discuss all of the things that that she enjoyed about the show. But I'll never forget, we were sitting on the couch and it was the reveal of what happened to with Show Tucker and his daughter. And I kept thinking, oh man, he's being weird, and weird is an understatement, right? He keeps talking about being, the people coming to see his research and all of these things, and I was like, oh, what's going to happen? I'll never forget when they finally reveal what did happen. For those of you who haven't watched the show, I'm not going to reveal here what happened. But for those of you who did watch the show, but she turned and looked at me over the couch. It was like, can you believe this? Can you believe he did this? And there's an allusion to like something he says about his wife, which leads you to believe that he had done the same thing to his wife. And I cannot get over that still to this day. There's a lot of scarring things that happen, but it's only 64 episodes. 4 episodes I think are filler, if I'm not mistaken, and it ends as much corruption that is revealed and heartbreak that happens to the characters. It ends on a high note, which I really enjoyed. So a lot of people recommend it because it's great, and it's one of those shows that you could recommend to people who don't really watch anime. My mom and her friend were watching it. It's fantastic. So, greatness. And speaking of anime that start off wild right out the gate, I'm going to say Demon Slayer was, and it still is because I'm still kind of watching it, but like the first couple seasons were one of my faves. Mostly because at this point, y'all know that Bleach is one of my favorite anime, and I'll get to that at some point in this episode. But there's a lot of, you could tell like influence from Kubo in this story and even in the animation, which I think is great. But a lot of people say that the show is carried for because of the animation, which is interesting to me because when you talk to people about One Piece, they talk about how they can't stand it because they don't like the animation. Okay. So, moving on. I remember having a conversation with my brother, my younger brother, and my younger sister because they were trying to figure out how to get back into watching anime. It was something that we always did as a family because I think that a lot of us here in the States that are around my age, that are millennials, that's all I'm going to say. We all kind of started watching Toonami and, Dragon Ball Z when we got home from school. So we kind of strayed away from that for a long bit. And I had jumped back into it, watching it with an ex of mine, and they are trying to get back into it, watching different things. So, of course, I recommended FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which they loved. So they wanted to jump right into the next thing. And they said to me, how come you didn't recommend Demon Slayer? I hear this is really good. I haven't seen it yet, and I haven't seen it also because it's not finished. I know that the manga is finished, and I'm trying to wait for them to get as many episodes out. But new age anime are different than the big three, which in this house is Bleach, One Piece, and Naruto. Argue with your mama. But that sort of production schedule that was prevalent with the big three is not the same as it used to be. So they take breaks, which I think is great. Everybody needs a break. But it takes time getting the full story. You know what I mean? In which case they only watch dubbed, which is also fine. Find something you like, watch it, as long as you're watching it. But that also pushes back the schedule because you have to wait for the content to be made, and then you have to wait for it to be dubbed, which I normally don't have the patience for. So a lot of people will say, oh, why do you watch subbed? It's not anything that deep other than the fact that I absolutely want to know what happened, and I don't feel like waiting for episodes to be dubbed. So I'm a little impatient. But anyway, they jump right into it. And they did tell me they wanted to see a show that's completely finished. Well, that would be why I didn't recommend Demon Slayer just yet, not because I didn't think it was going to be good. But anyway, they started watching it before me. And they had a wonderful time, like an absolutely wonderful time. And my sister doesn't really watch movies or TV in that regard in any long form. So it was interesting to see that this kind of kept her interested, kept her, wanting more. So I was like, oh, okay. And they were like, listen, you at least have to go watch the first season. You have to. I'm like, man, I'm already, watching One Piece. And this was before Bleach had come back. So it was like, I don't want to jump into watching another ongoing show because I'm already watching One Piece. You know what I mean? But anyway, they bullied me into it, and I jump into in the first episode, even with knowing that, as you're online and you're listening to people talk or different things in certain settings. And, you kind of know what the basis for the story is. Like he has the story centers around Tanjiro, and he joins the Demon Slayer Corps. But I don't think I knew that he was the sole survivor in his family of an attack that left his sister turned into a demon. I think that was the portion of the story that had been left out. And I think I knew that his sister was a demon, but it didn't occur to me that something had happened and that's what caused this. So like right away in the first episode, we're like, oh, I'm going down the hill to sell firewood to help feed my family because my father's not here, and my father's gone, and I have to help my mother and that sort of thing, which is great. I'm like, cool beans. And then he comes back to his family having been slaughtered, and the only one that's left is his younger sister, who is a demon. And he is on this mission to be like, we have to turn her back. We have to get her back to the way she used to be. And I'm like, is that even possible? Right? He seems to know like right away, like I can make this better. And just the scene like where he comes in and finds his family dead, it was like, this is heavy. He wants to figure out it sometimes it almost reads, because that really is it really took me aback, and like I knew that it was coming and still was like, this is a lot. So the whole watching him, find a trainer and having to carry his sister on his back, and she only can come out at night, she can't be bothered with the sun either. The fact that he's able to join the Demon Slayer Corps with a demon sister that he keeps with him, and having been part of the Corps for so long was crazy to me. But I think the training, and listen, I'm a shonen girly through and through. I love a good training arc. Okay. But, him training and taking the test and realizing that most people don't survive this test. This guy who's trained him has trained several kids. And, again, if you haven't watched the show, that's all I'm going to say. But just know that the reveal at the end of the training arc, I wasn't prepared for either. And then, of course, the Michael Jackson character, villain. I love that. A lot of people joke about it, but I love it. And so here I am waiting for the Infinity Castle movie to come out, which is supposed to come out at some point this month. So I'm probably going to be going to the movie theater to see that. I am at the ready. Okay. But yeah, that took me by surprise. I had to go and get, I think in the second season, I had to go and buy like the box set. And this was during, the COVID lockdown, and we weren't getting shipments of anything, much less books, manga, different things. So it took me forever to get my box set of Demon Slayer, but it's here. And once I finish the anime, I'll jump back into reading it, because that's who I am, a nerd. So if you've been listening to me for this long, most of the stuff that I stumble across is usually because somebody has recommended it to me. But in the case of this next entry, it was just because it was something that was recommended to me on Hulu, right? And when I'm using streaming services or, kind of generative services like, Apple Music and things like that, when it recommends something, I kind of just go with it. You know what I mean? Or even on Audible or things like that I'm listening to. Based on your likes, we think, based on the things that you watch, based on the things that you've listened to, we think you'll like this. So they're almost never wrong. When Danny gets back on the show, we'll talk about how she recommends things to me. I enjoy them. And then when I recommend things to her, she never watches them. I'll get her in the hot seat. But anyway, I opened up Hulu one day, and this was during the time that they had that partnership with Funimation. And so a lot of anime were showing up there. But it recommended to me, oh, you're trying to find anime to watch. We think you'll like Assassination Classroom. Based on the fact that you had been watching Bleach and One Piece and other things. So this should be right up your alley. Okay, let's do it. I'm pretty sure I'm a person who will watch things without knowing anything about it. And that's changed from my past life where I had to know everything about what was going on going into it. But just know Assassination Classroom is another, box set that I had to run out and get. So I have several, by the way. So without knowing anything, I jumped right into it first episode. And so for those who don't know or want to watch it, the premise of the show is that 70% of the moon was obliterated. It's permanently in the shape of a crescent. It was blown up by a yellow kind of monster tentacle creature. And the world government has kind of stepped in and been like, we're going to kill you. But he's proven not to be able to be killed. He is all powerful, has, regeneration, impenetrable skin, all of these things. And my personal favorite is that he can fly at Mach 20. But he says that within a year, he's going to do to the earth what he did to the moon. And they're like, how do we kill this guy? But he says, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to blow up the earth. If I can become a teacher at this junior high school and become, the teacher in this classroom, which is like disadvantaged academically, right? And at this particular school, if you don't perform, then you're kind of cast aside. Like, so they are not even on the main campus, like a classroom in the freaking woods, and just kind of left to their own devices. Like, if you can't handle it, then this is where you are. They don't even care if you're coming to school or not, right? And so, they are subject to cruel and unusual punishment. So each of the students in class 3E is given the opportunity to kill the creature as he is the teacher, aka Assassination Classroom. So what it becomes is them not only, being taught, because at that point they hadn't even had a teacher. I don't believe. So he comes in and he's their teacher. And he also, in between math and science and English and different things, he's teaching them the art of assassination, aka the Assassination Classroom. So from episode 1 that their objective is to kill their teacher. I say that because that's not a spoiler, right? And I think I said something online and people were annoyed. You knew in the first episode right away that their objective was to kill the teacher. So even as a person who writes and who blogs and who is trying to put together several books and different things, I was taken aback by how the show ended, and it's only 2 seasons, by the way. I can't even remember. Let me see. I can't even remember how many episodes there were. I think 60 is a lot. 47 and 1 OVA. So yeah, 60 seemed like on the high side. But what happens is, in typical shonen fashion, that they are excelling because they actually have a teacher who cares about them. He teaches them a lot, and their sense of self-worth, it improves dramatically over time. He's actually one of the best teachers they've ever had, and they, come into contact with different things, people, and they have different teachers and different things like that. But they call him Koro Sensei, who it's just a moniker for, how we have to kill the teacher. But he also teaches them the ways of assassination so they can use that to kill him in the future. But how often is that, like honestly, how often does that work? Right? How often is the master taken down by the student? So it's that kind of story too. But in the end, other assassins are coming after Koro Sensei, and they're trying to get this reward. But there's a little bit more underneath that. But in the end, and it's not a spoiler to say this, he does die at the end. You knew that in the beginning. But I think this was the first anime or story of any kind that I knew in the beginning what the supposed ending was supposed to be. And then when they never lied to you. When that happened, I was devastated. And I think it was like a month and a half before I watched anything else. So it's just the way that it's done. I'm not going to say any more than that. It's just the way that it's done. And it, it's not new to me to cry over an anime, but I did not see that coming, and I feel like I should have. So if you're going to watch it, be prepared. Okay? So there's that. So that brings me to Kuroko's basketball. And again, I did a blog post about this show and the movie. So those are 2 separate posts. So if you ever get a chance or are ever bored and you want to read about those, you should definitely do it. But for the longest time, I had an aversion to sports anime. And I wasn't the hugest basketball fan. So I remember several friends of mine online saying, you should watch this show. You would love it. And I'm like, I don't know. But, during lockdown, there wasn't much to do. So again, I found it on, I think this one is on Netflix still. So pulled it up, jump right into it. So it's 3 seasons, as Americans have to have everything broken down into seasons, but it's 75 episodes, 25 episodes a season. And it is about, the Teiko middle school basketball team, which dominated everybody in Japan. They call the star players there the generation of miracles. Well, after moving on from middle school, each of the 5 players went to different high schools with the top basketball teams. And so there is going to be a slaughter fest when it comes to high school competitions, because all of them want to see which one, as the Generation of Miracles, they played together and they were dominant, but which one of them is going to reign supreme when it comes to, you know, being one of one on a different team. But there's also this rumor that there was a 6-man on the Generation of Miracles. Well, this player is, you know, now at Sarin High School. It's a new high school. They're starting up a basketball team, and, you know, there's a guy, Kagami Taiga, and he runs into Kuroko, which they, you know, he figures out later was the 6th person on the team. But it's interesting because Kuroko doesn't really have any basketball talent, right? He can't shoot. He can't really run. He doesn't have the body for being a basketball player. But what he can do is he could pass the ball like nobody's business. And so, because so many of them counted him out, he really wanted to be, his goal is to beat them all one by one. And so you follow them through the different Generation of Miracles: Kisei, Midorima, Daiki, you know, Akashi, Murasaki Bata, all of them. And so they all have, you know, talent, and then a different talent that takes them through the top, which makes them the Generation of Miracles. And I don't think I ever watched basketball in that way before, right? The fact that they're trying to put together a team, the fact that they're trying to train and figure out how to get better and how to do different things. I don't think I watched an anime in sports in that way, which I'm not sure why, because I do enjoy sports and I enjoy anime, so it makes sense that this was something I enjoyed. And we won't talk about my friend who recommended this to us, because she was the one person who had seen it in the group and then made everybody go and watch it. And we all agreed to do it because we weren't doing anything else. So that it was all we could talk about for like 3-4 months. And then I got my ex to watch it, and he enjoyed it. And, you know, I was trying to get my sister into it, but I don't know that she's as into sports or basketball as I am. So we still have to finish it, but we'll get into that. I think my favorite kind of scenes involve there's this one character that doesn't talk at all, and everybody there's another character that seems to know exactly what he's saying, quote unquote, which makes it hilarious. And I think for me, this was a great show because it was able to infuse comedy in a way that I had not seen in an anime before. How many of us would want to watch 75 episodes of them playing basketball? But it was hilarious for many reasons. And if you have a chance, you need to watch it. I won't tell you how things end up, but I think, you know, the demographic is shonen, so you kind of know how things end up. But there are a lot of losses and different things in between, and a lot of underestimating, which I enjoy. Underestimate me. So this is a battle shonen in a different way. Get on that. And speaking of battle shonens in a different way, that brings me to Food Wars, or Shokugeki no Soma. Right? So this was another one that a friend of mine online had recommended to me. And it was like, oh, she basically was like, you watch the Food Network and you watch the cooking competitions. And I'm like, yeah, I enjoy that. Guys Grocery Games, Beat Bobby Flay, whatever. And she basically was like, yeah, well, they have an anime, Food Wars. That's right up your alley. So I know what people are going to say. Their reactions to tasting food where their clothes fly off is a bit much. Agree. But I think for me, I was able to kind of see like the overarching storyline as something that kids need to pay attention to, right? So you follow Soma, whose father one day just kind of ups and goes, on a tour to do, I can't remember what he got up and left to do, but he like closed the restaurant that they owned. And he basically was like, what you need to do is you need to go to this school, this culinary school, and try your hand at it. And I'll be back eventually. Right. So he ends up going off to an elite culinary school in Tokyo, where only, I think, a handful of students graduate each year. And they come from all over the world. They have to pass an entrance exam, and there is, steep competition. And so all of these people are talking about how they've been, cooking in different places since they were very young and doing different things. And, they're looking down on Soma because he has, kind of a diner or small restaurant kind of vibe. You know what I mean? So they don't think he needs to be there. And it's weird because the campus is like damn near a resort, with different clubs and cooking classrooms and, large arenas for competition. And so, but everything is a cooking competition, which is interesting to me. And there's an overarching story about who Soma's father is and the difference between what you do and who you are. So, cooking is what you do. You could be great at it, but it's not who you are. And one of the things that I saw that was parallel between these two, between Kuroko's basketball and Food Wars is that, Daiki struggles with being good at something, just like Soma's father struggles with being good at something, to the point where nobody wanted to compete with them, whether it be basketball or Food Wars, and how they kind of dealt with, whether or not I win or whether or not I'm better shouldn't stop you from wanting to compete. And because there's nobody for me to compete with, that makes me kind of fall out of love with this thing that I enjoy doing. Do I still love this thing? Do I still, whatever. So that's an interesting journey that everybody goes on. But, people band together. Soma finds his footing. Soma's untraditional in that way. He's unrefined, which sometimes rubs people the wrong way. But also, it gives the show its edge. So it was something that I enjoyed watching. It may not be something that everybody enjoys watching, but I enjoyed it. So there is no box set, but I do have it on my shelf here. I have a lot of manga on my shelf, but we'll go over that some other day. So there's that. So next on the countdown has to be My Hero Academia, because this is another story that's a battle shonen, but it's set up in a way where you have to also talk about, like, there's a difference between what you do and who you are, you know. So Midoriya lives in a world where about 80% of the human population has a superpower. They call it a quirk. And usually they are various things and are inherited from parents. But because most of the society has this enhancement, a few of them get jobs as heroes, right? They cooperate with authorities. They work in rescue operations, running after criminals who are using their quirks to abuse other people or just take advantage. So, essentially villains. So they've set up schools for people to become heroes. So like at the start of the story, they're leaving middle school and going to, high school to try to hone, skills for rookie heroes, which I thought was an impressive kind of story or setup for telling a story. So this one is also on Crunchyroll and Hulu, and I can't remember if it's on Netflix or not, but I'll have to look. So I wanted to see how this was going to go, but the story centers around Midoriya, whose mother has a quirk. His father, so far as I've watched, and I need to get back into that, is a fire breather. So she's kind of waiting for her son's quirk to kind of manifest, but it never does. And so he goes to school with a bunch of kids from elementary school to where the show opens up, not having a quirk. And he has this dream of becoming a pro hero. And, just when my quirk comes in, it'll be fine. But, the doctor basically says that's never going to happen. Never. And I felt bad for your boy because when you're an adult, you start realizing that there are things that you wanted to do. There are things that you saw yourself doing as a kid, whether it be personal or career wise, that at some point you didn't end up doing, and you had to be realistic for why it wasn't a good fit for you, right? And so he has a conversation with his favorite hero, All Might, who he runs into, because he is on I guess he has an encounter. He runs into him. He asks for his autograph and different things. And All Might basically says, maybe you should think about going into, search and rescue or being a police officer. You don't have to go the superhero route in order to be considered a hero, which is, not something that you want to hear. But then, of course, it's revealed that All Might has been severely injured and he's not really the hero everybody thinks he is. He can only hold it for, his power for a certain amount of time. And he finds a predecessor in Midoriya who he can pass down his power to. So here's a kid who never had a quirk and is now like given one. He has to train in order for his body to be able to handle it. And then even then, when he gets the power, it doesn't just happen for him the way that he thinks it should. And in the beginning, when you were online, a lot of people complained about the show and how they didn't like Midoriya and this, that, and the third. And like, here's a boy who's been bullied. he gets to a school where people actually do like him, you know, and he's having to deal with all of these different things while also having to learn this quirk that his classmates have had years prior to, you know, kind of understanding or at least a little bit of knowing what their quirk does. He's behind them by 10 years, you know? So, but I mean, there's a lot of great storytelling in season 1, and you know, a lot of great dynamic characters in the side characters that you get to see in Todoroki and everyone else that make up class 1A that he gets to when he finally does get into the school. You know, so there's another set of manga that I bought that when I finally finish everything, I'll sit down and finish reading that. But that is absolutely one of my favorites for various reasons. Love a good battle shonen. Love anything to do with superheroes. Love watching people get beat up. Then this is for you. So the next one is going to be Samurai Champloo. And I wondered if it was going to be this or Cowboy Bebop. It's the same creator if I remember correctly. But there was something about Samurai Champloo that held on to me, and I think it's probably the character of Mugen and his backstory. But anyway, Samurai Champloo is, I think, about 13 episodes, something like that, if I remember correctly. Well, excuse me, 26 episodes. And you know, it centers around a young tea waitress, Fu, who is about like 15, and she is begging this outlaw, who we figure out later is Mugen, to protect her from the son of the town's corrupt prefect. And Mugen, who you find out really doesn't do anything unless it benefits him, which makes sense. He was like, oh yeah, I'll do it if you feed me, right? And at the same time, Jin comes to town. He's a Ronin, and this is set during the Edo period in Japan. The two of them basically kill all of the prefect's bodyguards, and Mugen and Jin end up trying to fight each other. They end up destroying the tea house, which gets them kind of both captured and sentenced to death. But Fu saves them, and she basically tells them, like, listen, I saved you, so you guys have to follow me and help me find the samurai who smells like sunflowers or something like that. Like, I don't think he has a name, but I think that the implication is that it's her father, and she's been looking for him for years, and so they end up having to put off their epic battle to the death to follow her and help her find the samurai. And the show is episodic, and I think that's great. But the overall arc and kind of both Jin and Mugen's backstory You find out that Mugen can't read, which makes sense. But you also find out, he's got these tattoos on his wrist and ankles, and he's from this island where, the people are prisoner, and all of these different things. And it culminates with the end of the show where, they finally arrive in a town where he's supposed to be. They each end up in a conflict with a group of assassins that were, sent by the government. And she's really trying to race to get to see her father. And each of them having to battle, it is what it is. But it's such a great show in the way that they tell the story, in the art and the visuals and different things, and the way that different things are mixed in, hip hop and different things that are that make up the show and the sound. It's structured like a road movie, which is like one thing after another happening to them, trying to figure out how they're going to eat, how they're going to do different things, and blah, blah, blah. And there's this weird notion that, Mugen feels kind of like an outsider because he's rough around the edges. There's a lot that he doesn't know, but she expects to be safe. Fu gets into a lot of trouble too. Who kidnaps this girl this much? But anyway, the expectation though is more on Mugen to kind of save her than it is on Jin, and they kind of play that up, especially in the episode where they go back to his home island and they run into his old friends and these things like that. We know that Mugen is kind of self-taught, and he's rough around the edges because he's lived a harsh life, which is the exact opposite of Jin's character, who basically was taught by a master, taught in a school, and he's a Ronin because he ended up having to kill his master, and he's on the run from people who are after him. But the three of them make a weird traveling group that you can't help but watch. And so every few years I sit back and rewatch the show. And I notice a bit more and more towards the end. And I think that's one of those shows that's always on both Hulu and most places that you could probably watch anime. They probably have Samurai Champloo and Cowboy Bebop. So, and I think a lot of both Cowboy Bebop and Samurai Champloo are sometimes it's lost on people because the show is episodic, and so the overarching theme is over people's head at some points. But the idea that these two more or less grown men would follow this teenage girl out into the woods on this half-baked plan is odd to me too. And there are a lot of instances where she gets into trouble and you wonder why they go through the trouble of going through to get her out when they can all go their separate ways. And in the end, when they do all go their separate ways, it's a sad time. So it is what it is. But if you ever get a chance to watch it, you should. 26 fun episodes for me anyway. So next on the list is going to be Noragami. And we won't even get to how great the intro is for both seasons of Noragami. I will say that it needs that third season. I'm sad that the women who wrote the manga stopped writing, because I was prepared to go wherever they wanted to go with it. And I was prepared to get more than 3 or 4 seasons into it. But anyway, Noragami is a bit more supernatural and fantasy-like than I'm used to watching or reading. They claim it's a shonen. I can kind of see that. But anyway, it's about a minor god named Yato who is trying to gain followers. His dream is to become like a well-known and revered god. But he doesn't have a shrine or worshipers. And that's because he's a god of calamity, right? He was born from a wish, a not so great wish, you know, in comparison to the people, to the other gods who have shrines that he knows. These people come to him and they worship, they talk, they pray, and they pray about great things happening. So there's the different gods of gods of prosperity, good luck, good fortune, all kinds of love, and all kinds of great things, right? And people really only come to him when they want bad things done. And he doesn't shy away from that. But once the deed is done, the bad thing that they want done is done, they forget all about him. And he is deathly afraid of being forgotten about and being erased from existence, right? So anyway, he runs into this girl, Hiyori, who is really, like, when he's walking down the street, one of the only people who can see him. He's used to, not being seen. She was involved in a bus accident while she's trying to protect him. She doesn't know that he's a god. She thinks the bus is going to hit him and it's, going to be trouble from here on out. And she risks her life. But what happens is, in the process, her soul becomes loose from her body, and she's leading her life in an out-of-body experience. And so she tends to see a lot of different things from the two parallel worlds, the near shore, where her, regular humans and creatures reside, and the far shore, where, human souls linger, where the gods are, and different things. She gives him the 5 yen that he wants to help her fix her body, but there's a weird story within there, because there's a lot more to Yato than she knows, and he both wants her to be in his life because he doesn't want to be forgotten by anyone, but also he understands that it's probably not best for her to remember him in any way. And it's weird because he's like 1,000 years old. Damn near. There's a lot of instances where they're wondering, you know, how he knows certain things, and he always has to tell both Yuri and his regalia, his weapon, that's like a human soul that he's made into a weapon. Yukine, that I know I look like I'm 20, but I'm much older than you think. So I've been through like every phase of life. So, you know, it's just an interesting amalgamation of stories about how the relationship between Yato and Yukine works, what he knows about Yukine's life, right? And I actually have to finish the manga because I had been reading it and I had gotten up to the point where we figured out how Yukine died. But this is something that Yato knows from the very beginning, right? And they don't say anything to him about it for various reasons. So in the beginning, Yukine is upset that he's dead, you know, and he's trying to take things out on the world and do different things and steal different things. And that becomes a problem for Yato through their connection. I mean, it's sad because it's just a great story that needs to continue. I need to start a letter writing campaign or something. You know what I mean? So I need to make sure also that I have all of the volumes. I think they're being released in omnibuses now. So I don't know that I'm going to go through it and change what I have, but you know, we'll see what we can get. We also need, by the way, more box sets. I mean, I shouldn't have to constantly buy things one at a time, but that's a story for another time. So that brings me to my last two, which would be One Piece and Bleach, right? You weren't going to get away without hearing from the big three. One Piece was such an interesting turn of events because that was something that my ex really enjoyed. And I'm talking about enjoyed to the point where he's rewatched it from the beginning about 10, 15 times. And like Danny's husband, he's one of those people. It's a little different in that FullMetal Alchemist is completely done. Brotherhood is completely done. But that poor guy, he goes back. And I mean, when I first started watching it, it was like 450 episodes. And he was watching it with me from the beginning. And then he found another friend at about 600 episodes, started watching it with them from the beginning. And caught up. And so like every time he meets somebody new, he watches it from the beginning with them. But at this point we're like over 1,100 episodes. So, you know, but he gets a kick out of rewatching things. So I'll probably do an episode here where I talk about all of my favorite plot points from One Piece from then into now. And that of, you know, my favorite Bleach moments, because I mean I still haven't finished the 1,000-Year Blood War, so I'm kind of just holding on until the next core. But again, you know, it is what it is. But anyway, for those of you who are missing out or being wimps because 1,100 episodes seems like a lot, look here, you're missing out on a great story. And I'm not one of those people that tells you, oh, well, One Piece gets good when, you know, you get to episode 300. No, I was hooked from the very beginning. And it's probably because I was also watching it with a friend and that was fun. I was able to discuss things with them. But that could be it. I don't know. But I will say maybe that was better. But I remember this was after I had watched Bleach. So he had picked something for me, which I realized was Bleach, and he was right at the time. And I have so much Bleach memorabilia. Okay. But he had picked that for me, and then he said, "Do you want to see my favorite anime?" And if I had known then that I would be along this long ride, and I can say that for both of those shows, but like, if I had not agreed to at that time watching either one of these shows, would my life be better, worse? I don't know. Who knows? Butterfly effect. But anyway, he put on One Piece, and from the time Luffy hops out the barrel to when Shanks gives him the straw hat that he is later known for, Mugiwara, I had to know. I knew when Shanks gave him that hat. Like, I had to know how this ends. I have to know how this ends. Does he give Shanks the hat back? When are we going to run into Shanks? Oh, my goodness. So, yeah. So, it's another show about, a lot of people think it's just a pirate show. And you can usually tell people who haven't really watched the show because they'll tell you things because they read highlights online, but like, yo, y'all are missing out. Great fights, great transformations. It's funny at times when it needs to be. My favorite character is always going to be Sanji. Argue with your mama. I mean, Sanji, Zoro, Law, don't come for me. But, Sanji was always going to be my favorite. He's also a cook. Maybe I have a thing. I don't know. But the trying to gain crew members and he knows, a lot of people say that Luffy is dumb. He fits into that category of the really happy-go-lucky MCs, Goku, Naruto, Luffy, Natsu, and so there's a bit of a formula there, but Luffy is not that dumb in that he knows that he has to get a crew of people who specialize in different things, who know what they're doing, if he's going to survive on this journey. But the kicker for me is the overarching themes, like the racism, the government corruption, and things like that. So a lot of times, you're talking to people and they'll say, I don't want these heavy themes in my anime. And then they'll tell you, well, my favorite anime was One Piece, or my favorite anime was FullMetal Alchemist. Oh, you picked two about government corruption. Wonderful. So that always makes me laugh. And so I remember I had to explain to a guy where they're talking about one of the first arcs that the crew has together is Fishman Island. And, the fishmen are all more powerful than supposedly than humans. And they can breathe underwater. They can do a lot of different things. And so they were captured and made slaves. And so Arlong has decided that him and his people are no longer going to be slaves. Boy, I feel like I heard this story before. And when I said it to a friend of mine, he was like, I didn't even look at it that way. I mean, it was kind of blatant. And then the other thing was, just the government corruption. Knowing that in a lot of these areas where Luffy and the Straw Hats land, the government knows that these people don't have any clean air to breathe, don't have any water, don't have any food. They know that they've been taken over by such and such a force. Sometimes that force is the world government navy, sometimes the world government navy has moved in and blown people up and killed a bunch of people. And what they've done is they have blamed that on the pirate generation. So, a lot of times the people pulling the strings is the world government. So the pirates are made out to be the bad guy because it's easy to make them look like the bad guys. There's even a character that's part of the Navy, Tashigi, who I really do not care for because she has a very black and white sense of justice. And that is until she realizes that she's working under, not Smoker, but another guy who is in cahoots with all of these people who she claims are criminals. Well, now, is he the criminal or is he being taken advantage of, you know? And so her eyes are being open, but I mean, not fast enough. She's getting on my nerve. So there's that. But it's such a great show. As you heard me say about Noragami, Noragami deserves a third and fourth and fifth season, or more episodes just in general. I don't ever have to say that about One Piece because, and I'll tell you what, my guy friend who was rewatching things, he has been watching One Piece since it aired in 1999. So for him, it's been 23 years or something like that, 24 years. And I'm sad for him when everything is finally said and done and when this goes off the air and it's like, instead of to be continued, the end, you'll have to help him. I have been kind of weathering the storm because I had to go through that 10-year hiatus about Bleach, which I'm going to start talking about now. But I worry about him when this is all said and done. Is he going to be okay? And then finally, Bleach is, my absolute favorite. I talked about Demon Slayer earlier and the influences that Bleach has had on that show. And in that story, you can see they jump right off the page. And I'm so glad that there are people out there who don't try to pretend like, oh, Bleach wasn't a heavy hitter. It did influence me. Because I think both Kohei and the creator of Demon Slayer talked about how much Kubo and Bleach influenced them, which is a big deal. So we were all glad that the 10 years went by and we're back to Bleach. Nobody's more excited than me. So it is what it is. And, but I've said this before. It was something that my friend showed to me, and I was going through a pretty rough time in my life where, pretty deep depression. And so it was the one thing that I could grab onto, that I could look forward to watching. And even at that time, when I started watching it, it was 2012 and it had already gone off the air. So I was, already behind the eight ball, but I stuck with it, loved the characters, loved the women in the show, loved the storytelling. And there's something about both One Piece and Bleach where you meet a character. In One Piece, it's Sanji. Sanji is one of the characters that you meet in One Piece that you don't find out a lot of their significance or why their backstory is significant until much later. Same thing happens in Bleach with Kisuke, where you don't know why Kisuke is where he is until much later in the series. So it's a form of storytelling that I both dig and hate. But I'm here for it every time. Once the answer is revealed, I'm down bad, In Sanji's case, I had always wondered why his backstory was just that he was like an 8 or 9 year old on this cruise ship. And I was like, where are his parents? Like, what's going on? Well, when you get to Whole Cake Island, which is like 800 episodes later, you find out why. And in Kisuke's case, you know, he's the one that has that shop. He knows all of these things. He shows up to help train Ichigo to send him in to get Rukia back. And you wonder why he knows these things. And, you know, it's kind of revealed to you that, you know, he has a connection to the Soul Society. But the question is, why is he living in the real world? What happened there? What's going on? And boy, is it revealed. More so than Mr. Yoruichi and what they really look like. So it's those are two great stories for me, and I have it tied to so many, those two anime tied to so many great things that there's not enough time to talk about it all. So I'll have to double back. Maybe I'll watch, you know, make Danny watch those with me, at least a couple of episodes. She watched one episode of Bleach and like bowed out, and I'm like, dude, get yourself together. Also, always remember that these are my faves that come to mind. I do have the mind of an 11, 12-year-old boy. So these are things that I enjoy. Honorable mentions of things that I've seen is, you know, Hellsing, Tokyo Ghoul. I've watched The Irregular at Magic High. No Game, No Life. That's another one that needs a couple more seasons. They need to go back to that. Blue Exorcist, Steins Gate. So there's a lot that I've seen, and if I were to talk about everything that I've seen, we'd be here all day. So until next time, peeps, peace out.